Welcome to our deep dive, you guys, into the history of gold. You sent us a ton of articles and excerpts, so we're ready to dig through it all and find out the most interesting stuff about gold's history.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. It really is intertwined with the history of humanity.
So where do we even begin with this?
Well, let's go back to the very beginning to ancient Egypt. I mean, they were like the original gold mining center.
Okay.
Like, imagine a gold rush town called Coptos.
Coptos.
Yeah, it was on the Red Sea trade routes.
Oh, wow.
A total hub of activity. And get this, by 1300 BC, Egypt had control over like 100 Nubian gold mines.
Wow, 100.
Yeah. And with all that gold, their treasury was overflowing. They became like the dominant power in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, you could just imagine how rich they must have been.
And we even have evidence of how organized they were.
What do you mean?
The world's oldest mine map.
Really?
It's this papyrus scroll that's housed in the Turin Museum, and it shows, miners' huts, gold veins, all that stuff.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's like a snapshot of their mining world. And did you know that the word Nubia itself meant gold in ancient Egyptian?
So gold was literally in their language.
Right. And their obsession with gold is everywhere. Like in their art, there are wall paintings from around 1450 BC showing metal workers casting molten gold.
I mean, talk about a dangerous job.
I know, right? But it must have been an incredible sight.
Yeah, like a scene frozen in time.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got ancient Egypt with their gold obsession, but, the gold fever, it didn't stop there.
Oh, no, I'm sure it didn't. So who else caught the gold bug?
Oh, lots of civilizations.
Yeah.
Like even ancient writers like Herodotus and Strabo, they mention gold mining centers over in Asia Minor.
Okay, so Asia Minor is in on it too, but what about the Romans? I mean, they were kind of famous for loving gold.
Oh, they're totally obsessed.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, they didn't actually have a lot of gold domestically.
Barely.
No, so they went on these huge conquering sprees just to get more gold.
I mean, talk about ruthless.
They would exploit conquered lands like Spain. I mean, they even used like tens of thousands of slaves in the mines.
Really?
Yeah, like 40,000, I think.
That's insane.
Yeah, it was a brutal system. But, eventually the Roman Empire started to fall apart.
Right, and I'm guessing that kind of messed things up for their gold supply?
Yeah, the barbarian invasions scattered all that gold.
Oh, yeah.
And that actually led to a decline in gold mining during the Middle Ages.
So gold had its own little roller coaster ride through history.
Totally. It goes up, it falls down, and then guess what?
It comes back up.
Exactly. And gold's comeback story is actually pretty dramatic. Think about the post-Columbus era.
Okay.
When the Spanish came to the New World, they brought back tons of gold to Europe.
And that's what set off a whole new wave of gold fever, right?
You got it.
And of course, you can't forget about the conquistadors.
Oh, yeah, those guys.
Always searching for El Dorado, the mythical city of gold.
Well, they were driven by that image of the king covered in gold dust.
Right, the Gilded Man.
Well, exactly. From the Muisca Indians' ritual. It's crazy how a story like that could have such a huge impact on history.
I know, right? I mean, those stories and myths, they've stuck around for so long. Because gold, it has this hold on our imagination.
Yeah, it really does. And it's not just about stories either. This whole quest for El Dorado led to a massive surge in gold production.
Yeah. I mean, everyone wanted in on it.
Right. Like the Brazilian gold rush in 1691, that was a huge jump in global gold production.
So where else did they find all this gold?
Oh, all over. Like in the 1750s, they found it in the Ural Mountains.
Okay.
And then in the 1840s, there were discoveries of alluvial gold in Siberia.
Siberia, wow.
Yeah. And just before the treaty to end the Mexican-American War, they found gold in Coloma, California.
So it was like a global treasure hunt.
It really was. And then in the 1850s, there was the Fraser River Gold Rush up in British Columbia.
Okay.
And then in the 1860s, they found even richer deposits on Williams and Lightning Creeks, still in British Columbia.
Wow. I mean, all these discoveries, they must have had a crazy impact on the world.
Oh, they totally did. Like driving economies, shaping societies, and even starting conflicts.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gold has always been tied to both good and bad things.
It definitely has. And when we're talking about people obsessed with gold, we have to mention the alchemists.
Oh, yeah. The guys who wanted to turn lead into gold.
Exactly. They weren't out there digging for it, but they were totally consumed with trying to transform it.
They were like the mad scientists of their time, weren't they?
Well, maybe not mad scientists exactly, but they were definitely on a relentless pursuit of knowledge.
And they never actually managed to turn lead into gold. Right?
Well, no.
Like,
wait, are you saying their experiments weren't totally crazy?
Let's just say they were observing real things, but they didn't really understand what they were seeing.
So they were doing real science, but they just didn't have the knowledge to explain it.
Right. Like, For example, they might see copper depositing onto iron in a copper sulfate solution,
Okay.
and they'd think they were creating copper out of nothing, but really it was just a simple chemical reaction. So they were seeing real science, but they just didn't have the right framework to understand it.
Exactly. It makes you wonder what they would think of chemistry today.
Yeah, that's true. But I guess some of those alchemists actually made some important discoveries about chemistry, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, totally. Like, take Zosimos of Alexandria. He actually did some groundbreaking work that helped us understand elements and their interactions.
So alchemy wasn't just about magic and hocus pocus.
Right. It actually played a role in the development of science.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But let's get back to gold itself. I mean, it's not just about mining and alchemy, right?
No, definitely not.
It has a whole cultural and historical significance that goes way beyond money.
Exactly. Gold has been a part of mythology, religion, and art for, like, forever.
Yeah, like King Midas and his golden touch. Talk about a cautionary tale.
I know, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the myth of the Golden Fleece, a classic quest for adventure and treasure.
And those stories, they show how deeply gold is tied to our imagination.
They really do. And remember El Dorado? That legend, it wasn't just a story. It fueled the South American conquest and changed the course of civilizations.
It's wild to think about how one element could have such a huge impact.
I know. And the cultural significance of gold goes even deeper. Like, have you heard of Pipalika gold?
Pipalika gold. What's that?
It means ant gold in Sanskrit.
Ant gold.
Yeah, it refers to gold particles that ants would collect and bring to kings.
Ants bringing gold to kings. That's crazy.
Yeah, it shows you how connected nature and royalty were in ancient Indian culture. Gold was like a gift from the earth itself.
It's amazing how differently different cultures valued and viewed gold.
Yeah, it is. And there are even tales from Thousand and One Nights about palaces built with gold bricks.
It seems like gold has always captured the human imagination.
It really has. But all this talk about gold makes me wonder how we went from panning for it to the sophisticated methods we use today.
That's a great question. I guess that's a story for another time. So
Mhm.
we've talked about, ancient gold mines and alchemists trying to make gold out of thin air. But how did we actually get from those early methods like panning for gold
Right.
to the more complicated ways we use today?
Well, it's been a long journey. I mean, we started with gold panning,
Okay.
which, basically uses the fact that gold is super dense to separate it.
Like heavy. Right.
Yeah, heavy compared to other stuff.
Okay.
So it sinks to the bottom.
I got it.
And that was enough for those early prospectors. But as we wanted more gold, we needed better ways to get it.
Okay.
That makes sense.
And that's where amalgamation came in, right?
Yeah.
Using mercury.
Yeah, amalgamation was a total game changer.
Okay.
And it goes way back. Like the Romans even used it.
So how did it work? Did they just mix mercury with the gold rocks?
Well, it was a little more complicated than that.
That
They
again?
had to crush the ore first. Like
Yeah,
using
yeah.
these giant machines called stamp mills.
The sand mills.
Yeah, they were basically like big hammers that smashed the rocks into powder.
Right.
And then they'd mix that powder with water to make a slurry. And then they'd pour that slurry over these copper plates that were coated with mercury.
Okay, so the gold would stick to the mercury.
Right. And they'd form this mixture called an amalgam.
Oh, that's interesting. But I thought mercury was bad for the environment.
Yeah, you're right. Mercury's definitely a problem. And it's actually been banned in a lot of countries, but for a long time, it was a major part of how we got gold.
So progress isn't always perfect.
Yeah, that's true. But, the story doesn't end there.
What else did they come up with?
Well, they also started using chlorination,
Okay.
which uses chlorine gas to dissolve the gold from the ores.
Chlorine gas. Isn't that kind of dangerous?
Well, it can be, but it was a big step forward. And you know what's cool?
Yeah.
This actually has roots back in alchemy. Remember that mixture of acids they used called aqua regia?
Yeah. The stuff that could dissolve gold.
Right. That was discovered by an Arab alchemist named Jabir ibn Hayyan, like way back in the 8th century.
Wow. So even though alchemy never actually, turned lead into gold,
Yeah.
it still gave us some useful stuff.
Exactly. It helped us understand gold better and led to some practical applications.
That's interesting. So did chlorination replace amalgamation?
Well, neither of those are really the main way we get gold today.
Oh, really? So what is
The big revolution came with something called the cyanidation process.
cyanidation? Yeah, I've heard of that. It's like the main way we get gold now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. Like they use it to treat around 1 billion tons of ore every year.
1 billion. That's insane.
I know, it's a lot. So how did they figure out this process? Well, it's kind of a funny story. It all started with the chemistry of Prussian blue pigment.
Prussian blue. That's like a paint color, right? What did that have to do with gold?
Well, it turns out that the chemistry of Prussian blue helped scientists understand cyanide compounds better.
Oh, okay.
And then some guys named John Stuart MacArthur and Charles W. Merrill figured out that you could use cyanide solutions to dissolve gold from the ores.
So it wasn't like a sudden discovery. It was more like a bunch of little discoveries that led to a big one.
Exactly. And once they could dissolve the gold with cyanide, they had to figure out how to get it back out.
Right.
And that's where zinc comes in. They use zinc to kind of pull the gold out of the solution.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's complicated, but obviously it works really well. And, while the basic idea of cyanidation is still used today, they've actually made some improvements over the years.
Oh, like what?
Well, one example is the carbon in pulp technology.
Okay.
It uses activated charcoal to kind of soak up the gold from the cyanide solution.
It's like constantly evolving.
Exactly. But, all this talk about extracting gold makes me wonder, how do we even know if the gold's real? Like, how do we measure how pure it is?
That's a good question. I mean, you don't want to get ripped off.
Right. So it all comes down to understanding fineness and carats.
Okay, I've heard those terms before, but I'm not sure I really get them.
Well, think of fineness as like a score out of 1,000. So pure gold would be 1,000 fine.
Okay.
And carats are measured out of 24. So pure gold is 24 carats.
Oh, okay. So like 18 karat gold would be 18 parts gold and 6 parts something else.
Exactly. So when you see those markings on jewelry like 14K, 18K, 22K, that's telling you how much gold is actually in there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But how do they figure out the purity in the first place?
Well, they've got different ways. One of the old school methods is using touchstones and touch needles.
Touchstones.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. They'd rub the gold on this special black stone called a Tix stone.
Okay.
And the mark it left behind would be compared to marks from other alloys that they knew the purity of.
So it's like a visual test.
Yeah. And they used that for centuries.
I can just imagine them doing that like hundreds of years ago.
It's pretty amazing. And there's even a guy named Georgius Agricola who wrote all about mining and metallurgy back in the 1500s. He described this method in detail.
Wow. So it's a technique with a long history. But for more accurate measurements, they use something called the fire assay method, right?
Right. Fire assay is more precise. You basically melt the gold with special stuff at super high temperatures, and then the gold separates out and you can weigh it.
So it's more like a scientific test.
Yeah. And it's still considered super reliable.
So we've got touchstones for quick checks and fire assays for the real deal. And I guess they don't measure gold in like pounds or ounces, right?
Good point. Gold's got its own special unit of measurement. It's called the troy ounce.
Troy ounce?
Yeah, it's named after this medieval city in France called Troy, where they had big trade fairs.
Okay.
And for smaller measurements, jewelers often use pennyweights, or DWT.
So it's like a whole separate system of measurement just for gold?
It is, and it shows you how important it's always been to measure gold accurately.
Mm.
Because you don't want to get cheated.
No, definitely not. And I bet there have been some pretty crazy attempts to cheat the system over the years.
Oh yeah, tons. Like, remember that whole thing with the gold-plated tungsten bricks?
Wait, someone tried to pass off tungsten as gold? How is that even possible?
Well, tungsten is almost as dense as gold, so it's a pretty clever trick.
Oh, but they got caught, right?
Yeah. But nowadays, banks have fancy ways to make sure the gold is real. Like, they use neutron diffraction to test it.
So technology's hoping to keep things honest.
Exactly. But, all this talk about measuring gold makes me think about its role as money. It's pretty fascinating how gold became a currency.
Yeah, totally. Like, how did that even happen?
Well, it goes back a long way, like all the way to those early Lydian coins in ancient Asia Minor.
Oh, wow.
And it's evolved a lot over time. Like, we even had the gold standard at one point.
The gold standard? Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah.
But I don't really know how it worked.
Well, imagine a world where gold is basically the main form of money, but it's heavy and risky to carry around.
Makes sense.
So people would deposit their gold with goldsmiths for safekeeping.
Oh, so they were like the first banks.
Basically. But then they realized that people weren't taking out all their gold at once.
Okay.
So they started lending out some of that gold and charging interest.
Smart. So they were making money off of other people's money.
Exactly. And those loans helped businesses and trade to grow. And even kingdoms could finance projects with those loans.
So it was like a win-win for everyone.
Right. And then those goldsmiths, they started giving out certificates of deposit, which were like receipts for the gold people had deposited.
So those were like the first paper money.
Yeah. They were much easier to carry around than heavy coins.
Right.
And then in the 19th century, there were all these new gold discoveries, which meant there was more gold to go around. So countries started using gold as the basis for their money systems.
And that's how the gold standard was born.
You got it.
So what exactly was the gold standard?
It meant that countries linked their currencies to a specific amount of gold. So you could trade your paper money for gold at a fixed rate.
Okay.
It was supposed to keep things stable and make people trust the money system.
It sounds like a good system. So why don't we use it anymore?
Well, it did work well for a while, but it had its problems. Like during World War I, countries needed money to pay for the war, so they stopped using the gold standard.
Oh, so the war messed things up.
Yeah, it did. And after the war, they tried to go back to a kind of modified gold standard,
Okay.
but it wasn't as stable as before. And then the Great Depression happened in the 1930s,
Right.
and that put even more stress on the system. Countries started devaluing their currencies and hoarding gold.
So the whole idea of a fixed exchange rate just kind of fell apart.
Yeah, pretty much.
So is that the end of the gold standard?
Well, it didn't happen overnight, but it was definitely on its way out. The U.S. was a big player in this because they had the most gold.
Right.
They had set the price of gold at $35 per ounce, but in 1971, they had to abandon that fixed rate.
So that was it for the gold standard. But I mean, gold is still valuable today, right?
Oh, definitely. We don't link our currencies directly to gold anymore, but it still has a big role in finance.
Okay.
It's seen as a safe haven asset, like something that holds its value even when the economy's shaky.
So it's like a security blanket for investors.
Kind of. And central banks still hold on to gold as part of their reserves.
So even though the gold standard's gone, gold still has this kind of special power in the financial world.
It really does. It's like a reminder that some things hold their value no matter what's happening in the economy.
That's true. But we've talked a lot about money and finance. Where does all this gold actually come from?
Right.
And how is it stored and traded today?
Well, those are great questions, and we'll dive into those secrets in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've, gone through ancient mines and alchemy and even how gold's been used as money. But where does it all go? Like, where's all this gold kept?
Well, it's basically this global network of vaults.
Vaults. Like, I always think of Fort Knox.
Oh, yeah.
Like, those pictures of giant vaults stacked with gold bars.
Right.
Like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
Is it really like that?
Oh, yeah. Fort Knox is definitely the real deal. It's like the symbol of American wealth and security. And yeah, they do keep a lot of the U.S. gold reserves there.
Yeah.
Super heavily guarded and secret and everything.
So it's not just a myth.
No, it's a real place,
Hmm.
but it's not the only one.
Oh, right. So where else do they keep all this gold?
Well, the Bank of England has this huge vault in London. It's underground, and they store gold for a bunch of different countries.
Wow.
And then you've got the Swiss National Bank.
Okay.
They're known for being neutral and secure, so a lot of people trust them to store their gold. It's kind of crazy to think about all that gold just sitting in these vaults all over the world.
Yeah, it's like a hidden world of treasure.
Yeah.
But I guess it doesn't just sit there, right? Gold is traded every day.
Yeah.
So how does that all work?
Well, the gold market is pretty complicated. You've got physical trading, where they actually exchange gold bars.
Okay.
And then there's paper trading, which is more about contracts and stuff.
Okay.
And then you have these big gold exchanges in places like London, New York, Zurich.
Okay.
They set the prices for gold.
Hmm.
So it's not as easy as just like, going to the bank and buying a gold bar.
So it's more than just walking into a bank and saying, give me some gold.
Yeah. Right. Well, you can buy gold bars and coins from dealers and banks, but for the big trades, it's all done electronically with all these complicated financial tools.
Sounds complicated.
It is. There are so many people involved. Miners, refiners, traders, investors.
Okay.
It's a whole global system.
And you mentioned gold lending before. How does that fit in?
Oh, yeah. Gold lending's interesting. It's like using gold as money, but getting paid back in gold with interest.
Okay.
So mining companies might borrow gold to fund their operations,
Makes sense.
and then they pay back those loans with the gold they dig up.
So it's like a special kind of loan just for the gold industry.
Yeah, exactly. It helps mining companies deal with changes in the price of gold, and it also makes more gold available for trading.
So everyone wins.
Pretty much. But we've been talking about the traditional uses of gold, like money, jewelry investments.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any new and surprising ways we use gold today?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I always think of gold as this old-fashioned thing.
Well, gold actually has some really unique properties that make it useful for all sorts of modern stuff.
Okay, I'm curious. Give me an example.
Well, in medicine, they're using gold nanoparticles to treat cancer.
Gold fighting cancer. That's wild. How does that even work?
Well, these tiny gold particles can be used to target cancer cells.
Okay.
And then they can deliver drugs or heat therapy right to the tumor.
Wow, that's incredible. So gold is still being used for healing, just in a totally different way.
Right. It's like this ancient remedy meeting modern science. And it's not just medicine either.
Oh, really?
Gold is a great conductor of electricity, and it doesn't corrode easily.
Right.
So it's perfect for electronics, like those tiny wires and microchips and connectors.
So even our smartphones use gold.
Yeah. And like the gold-plated contacts in your phone, they make sure the electrical connections are reliable.
Wow, so even in our digital world, we still need gold.
Exactly. And it goes beyond that, too. Like, they use gold coatings on spacecraft to protect them from radiation and extreme temperatures. And dentists still use gold alloys for fillings and crowns because they're strong and safe to use in your mouth.
It's amazing how versatile gold is. I never realized it was used for so many things.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's definitely not just a relic of the past. It's helping to shape the future, too.
I have to say I've learned a lot about gold today. It's so much more than just a shiny metal.
It really is.
It's a symbol of power, a source of inspiration, and a key part of our world, both past and present.
And future. You know, if you want to learn even more about gold, I highly recommend checking out a book called Gold, History, Metallurgy, Culture.
Okay.
It's by Fathi Habashi. You can find it at the Laval University Bookstore Zone.
Great. That's a good resource for anyone who wants to keep exploring.
Yeah.
Well, I think that wraps up our deep dive into the world of gold. It's been a fascinating journey.
It has.
And I'm left with this thought: gold has captivated us for centuries. It's driven innovation, sparked conflict, and inspired countless stories.
Yeah.
It's really amazing to see how its role in society has changed and continues to change.
Yeah, it's a story that's still unfolding.
Who knows what the future holds for gold? But one thing's for sure, it's going to be an interesting ride.
It always is.